All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of Bear Grads, our webinar series on graduate student research and development. My name is Nicole Weber, and I will be moderating tonight's session, Mental Health for Graduate Students. I am very pleased to introduce our speaker for tonight. Dr. Bonnie Nicholson is an associate professor in the Applied Psychology and Counselor Education program here at the University of Northern Colorado. Dr. Nicholson specializes in couples and family counseling. Dr. Nicholson's research interests include ensuring student success through building a community in graduate school, supervision relationships, and the need for vulnerability within the training of counselors. Welcome, Dr. Nicholson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nicole. So yeah, I am a couples and family therapist. And in addition, I have the amazing job and honor of getting to train the future counselors. So our program includes clinical mental health, school counseling, couples and family counseling, and then also our doctoral level program in counselor education and supervision. So I work with a lot of grad students, and it wasn't long ago that I also was a grad student. So this idea of mental health for graduate students and really supporting graduate student success is something that's near and dear to my heart. All right, so start of your journey. So first and foremost, wanting to really say congratulations and recognize the dedication that you've taken in starting a graduate program. This is one in which there's a lot of challenges and a lot of moments of pride and uncertainty. All of that's included. But going to graduate school is something that's unique, and not a lot of people do graduate school and complete graduate school. So really congratulating you on your start and kind of talking about, like, now that you're here, now what as far as mental health goes, and a little bit around academics, but more so mental health. All right. So as our monkey is showing us there, the research on graduate school development, but also graduate school mental health, really finds that students describe this idea of like a surprise factor. So the fancy name is transitional cognitive development. The fun name is surprise factor. And what that boils down to is this idea that things that you used to do to be able to maintain your academic studies, your work-life balance, right, your well-being in undergrad, you developed some skills to do that. And hopefully they worked. If you went into a job after undergrad before coming to graduate school, you found your balance, you found your way. And so often when students think about coming to graduate school, they're like, okay, I can do this. Like, I rocked undergrad. And you are going to rock graduate school. But when you first begin, there's what they call this surprise factor of how overwhelming it can feel, some of the social emotional things that happen in graduate school, even keeping up with the academic tasks, because we ask a great deal of you in a graduate program beyond just reading and attending class, right? There's this application piece, there's a self-reflective piece, also thinking of new ideas, right? That critical thinking is beyond what we typically offer or ask for in undergraduate degrees. And so students describe this like surprise factor of like, I don't understand why the things that I used to do that worked aren't working anymore. And so that's what that speaks to. One of the other challenges of graduate school is that in graduate school, programs are really given responsibility for what they call socialization of their students, meaning that we're not only academically preparing you to get your degree and earn the experience and training that you need, we're preparing you to actually go into the career field, right? In whatever profession that we're in. So the socialization not only includes academically and skill-based pieces, but what is the culture and the dynamics of this profession that you're going into? How do we communicate? How do we spread ideas? What are some of the expectations around them? So with that, we're really, really focused on the holistic development and the application of materials. And there's a part of this in undergrad, but in undergrad, it tends to be the responsibility of the whole university, right? So the university takes on the charge of supporting your development and providing this holistic support, right? So you have faculty in several different departments that you work with in different programs. You have student activities, who's supporting you. You tend to have more involvement from like deans of students and things like that. In grad school, it really falls, for better or worse, falls on your one program, your one department. So it's a lot less faculty, right, that are involved. And typically there's less out of program opportunities that grad students know of, right? I think that we have an amazing graduate student association that's working really hard to provide those extra supports, but we also find that it's really hard to get graduate students to show up for them, right? Because you all are so busy, which is also a difference from undergrad, right? And undergrad students are typically on campus a lot more in their first few years, and so they have these connections to these different student activity offices, where in grad school, for the most part, y'all are here for classes and then you head home or you head to the library. So there's not as much of that support from the university-wide that students often feel in undergrad. And they rely more heavily on the program faculty, which is, a fewer number of faculty, but also the faculty that holds the role of being your evaluators, right? So it can be a lot easier to talk to someone in student activities about, like, I'm confused, I'm struggling, I'm feeling burnt out, than it can be to come to a faculty member that is evaluating your success and evaluating how you're doing and say, hey, I'm struggling, I'm feeling burnt out, I feel lost, I feel confused, right? That even if we want to be there for you, there's a power hierarchy there, right? That we hold power over your success in the program. And so there's some fear there. So this idea that really staying within the program and looking for that support doesn't often set up students for success, because there's barriers that are in the way, and there's only a few of us often, right? Like a handful of faculty versus an entire university. Here's another piece that comes in strong and swift and hard is in grad school, right? Is perfectionism. My guess is that if I asked you all to raise your hand, if you have some perfectionist tendencies, that every single one of you is going to raise your hand, right? Grad school is different than undergrad because you have chosen this as your career that you're dedicated and loyal to. And so you put a lot into this, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of energy. And so you want to do it well. And we find that grad students tend to score high on scales of perfectionism, right? That they not only want to do it well, they want to do it perfectly, right? They want to make sure that they're the perfect grad student, the perfect professional, right? The perfect person for this profession or career. So this quote really is important to me, and I really echo what it says, but this idea that at its root, perfectionism isn't really about a deep love of being meticulous. It's about fear of making a mistake, fear of disappointing others, fear of failure, fear of success. Right? And so that's one of my soapbox things. I'll step up there real quick and step back down. One of the things that always breaks my heart is when a student says, I'm just so lazy, I'm a perfectionist. I'm a procrastinator. I'm a procrastinator because I'm just so lazy. Procrastination has nothing to do with lazy or not lazy. That if you're telling yourself like, oh, you're just so lazy, get it done, I can guarantee you with like 99.5% accuracy that it's not about lazy, right? More often than not, it's about perfectionism. And what can happen is when we're so worried about being perfect, it becomes overwhelming, right? It starts to feel daunting, right? That like, well, I'm not even sure how to start. I'm not even sure what they want in there. I'm not sure what their expectations are, right? That a lot of it is that fear of, what if I don't do it well? What if I don't do it right? And that keeps us stuck in making progress, right? That and my daughter's teacher in first grade, I used to love, because the practice makes perfect comment. She refused to say that. And she used to say, practice makes progress, right? And so really encouraging this idea that we're not seeking perfection, that what we're seeking is progress and growth and development. But I know that for myself, I can get stuck in perfectionism, right? And I'll start something and be like, I'm not doing it well. I'll put it aside and come back to it later. And then I don't, right? Because it starts to feel daunting. It starts to feel overwhelming. I used to always say like, the night before is when I get my energy and I get it done. The night before was just when my anxiety got so high that I had to do something, right? And sometimes I could pull off a pretty good paper. And was it my best paper? Typically not, right? That it was my frantic, I have to get this done paper. So really working on trying to let go of this idea of it needs to be perfect, right? That instead it needs to be authentic and show that you're invested in this process. I do want to totally take on in this bias part that, I work in a helping field, right? Like I work in counseling. So we actually ask a great deal of our students of self-reflection, right? Like we want you to reflect on yourself. And other programs may or may not have as much of that. So for me, a lot of times, like, how do you mess up your self-reflection? Just get it out on the paper, right? But even when they're working on research papers, I'm like, put it out on paper and then come talk to me, right? We can move things once I have something to work with. But letting go of that perfectionism. And I say that and also recognize that I, at times, have been a hypocrite, right? That was for me, the hardest part of dissertation was sending it to my chair, right? That I wanted to make it perfect before they saw anything that I sent. And then really saying, I just need it, right? I don't care how ugly it looks. We know it's a first draft. And I'd be like, okay, hold on, let me just read through it a couple more times, right? And I'd get stuck in that perfectionist loop of, I don't want to send it on until I know it's perfect. And then I would send it in when it was perfect or as close as I could get it. And then they'd be like, okay, change this, change this, change this. And then it was a lot of wasted time and energy. And it felt more critical because I had worked so hard on making it perfect versus if it would have been a first draft, I'd been like, oh yeah, sure, that makes sense. It's a first draft. So really inviting you to really look at like, this is about progress, not perfection in that process, which is related directly to this idea of imposter syndrome. The research for a very, very long time has called it imposter syndrome. We're now moving to the terminology of imposter phenomenon, but I couldn't find a picture that said phenomenon instead. So the reason being for the change is that when you think of a syndrome, you think of an illness or something that's wrong, right? And this is nothing that's wrong. It's just an experience that people have. So that's where we're moving to phenomenon for. You'll see I have that quote in the corner there by Albert Einstein, who all of you hopefully know and are familiar with, right? And Albert Einstein said that the exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. And for me, this relates to that idea of imposter phenomenon or imposter syndrome. Imposter phenomenon, what it describes is the experience, the thoughts, the feelings that people who are high achieving often have in moments of uncertainty or when they're learning a new skill. And it's this idea that you're sitting and looking at everyone else and being like, they're so good at this and they're so good at this. And I'm not good. I'm not as good as all of these other people, to the point that you're like, I'm not sure why they let me into the program because I'm not cut out for this. And then eventually someone's going to figure out that I'm not good enough for this. And then it's going to all come crashing down, right? Or they're going to figure out that I'm the imposter, right? And that I'm not going to, that they shouldn't have let me in. They shouldn't let me graduate, whatever it may be. Albert Einstein experienced that as well, right? That a lot of times what the imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon comes from is the pressure that we put on ourselves. We tend to hold ourselves to much higher expectations than those around us, right? We also compare ourselves to others, right? There's not much that comes from comparison to others because you're on your own growth and learning journey. And the things that you're going to take from your graduate program, the things that you're going to do in your career are going to be unique to you, right? So comparison to others actually gets you nowhere except in this like cycle of self-doubt. But I also want you to hear that this is a very common experience. So if you're experiencing imposter phenomenon, there's nothing wrong with you. There's no reason of like, why don't I feel like I'm good enough? I thought I worked on all of this, right? Like I had a counselor, or I talked to these people and I thought I got better. it doesn't work that way. I wish it did. I wish it was a really simple thing of like, oh, I got over it once and I'm good. We find that imposter phenomenon comes back when you're attempting to learn or apply a new skill that you find to be extremely important, right? If you're like, man, I really want to do this and do this well, we see it pop up again, right? And I remember being frustrated myself, right? Like even finishing my master's, and then I moved on to the doc and I was like, I've got this. And then I felt the exact same way. And I was like, why do I feel this way? Right? I have a master's, good gravy. I got into a doc program and I'm feeling like an imposter and I'm waiting for them to find out and vote me out, just like on Among Us, right? I'm waiting for me to be voted out and it to be like, Bonnie is the imposter, right? That's what I'm waiting for. And it happened again when I first started training as a supervisor, right? That imposter phenomenon peeked its head again. And then again, when I started my dissertation. So unfortunately, the sad news is that I'm going to tell you it doesn't ever go away. And I found that it got quieter, that it would pop up, but I was able to process through and ground myself and remind myself and alleviate the symptoms of it or alleviate the pressure of it sooner. So have hope. It does get better, but it still comes up, right? And really kind of thinking about, I also talk about this idea of it being like on a continuum, that on one hand, you have confidence and self-efficacy in a task. And then on the other hand, you have the imposter phenomenon, right? Where you feel like you're going to be caught out. You feel like someone's going to find out that you're not good enough. In the middle is some of that uncertainty and self-doubt. So knowing that you don't typically go from imposter phenomenon to confident, right? You make your way up and you're like, okay, so now here's some of my self-doubt thoughts, but mixed with some uncertainty of like, I might be good at this, or like, someone did say I was good at that, right? And some of those like conflicting messages start happening. And then you work your way to that piece of confidence of like, this is my strength, right? And I know this is my strength. So really giving yourself permission for it to take a while, right? That it may, and again, sometimes you can get through it faster, but it's there and it's a part of that. Here's another piece of why grad school can be so challenging and so impactful on our mental health. So I want everyone to just take a minute, write them down, think them through, whatever it is, the roles that you play in your life and the responsibilities that you carry. So thinking about roles such as a sibling, a child, a parent, right? Maybe you're still working, right? So an employee. So thinking about all the roles you play, hopefully you put on there graduate student, because that's a role that you're playing. And then the responsibilities that you also carry, right? Maybe it's the bills that you have to pay for. Maybe it's, I'm going to leave it there and then I'm going to come tell you, I'm going to add to that. So just taking about a minute or so and thinking through the roles that you play and the responsibilities that you carry. Right, if you're still working, that's okay. I'm going to bring up the next part of this. When you have your list, if it's a physical list, go ahead and write it on there, or you're going to draw it on there. If not, just in your head, putting like a star, a highlight, circle around those roles and responsibilities that are either new because you're now a grad student or that are being impacted because you're a grad student, right? So for example, your graduate student role should be new, right, within joining. But for example, maybe in my own example, like my role as the only daughter in my family was deeply impacted when I started grad school because I was the one who planned all the family events and I suddenly couldn't do that anymore, right? Or I didn't do it well. So that would be one that I would circle or star. So circle or star the ones that you feel like are being impacted within this new role of being a grad student, that it's kind of bumping up against. All right, so we're going to take a quick poll. You don't have to raise your hand, but you can also hit like the raise hand button, or you can just ignore it altogether, and that's fine too. How many of y'all, when you looked at circling or starring, that most of those roles or responsibilities were starred or circled because grad school has had an impact on that role or responsibility? Yeah. So one, unfortunately, I'm not surprised. But two, I want you to see that you're not alone in that, right? That this is a common graduate student experience um, that it tends to be more impactful than it was in undergrad. Any ideas on why it might seem more impactful in graduate school versus undergrad? Yeah, absolutely. Right. And I feel like in undergrad as well, I think undergrad is so crucial and I honor it completely. But in undergrad, you have some classes that you're like, whatever, this is just a class I have to take. So I can just kind of like wiggle my way through it. Like, I'm not really concerned what that teacher thinks about me, right? Like, not in a bad way, but like, I didn't do the readings. Whatever. Right. In grad school, because this is something you're passionate about, the pressure that you put on yourself for every single class is high. The expectations that you have for every single class is high. Right. So it does have more of an impact. The other thing that we see is that often by the time you all get to graduate school, your roles have increased. Right. So some of these roles you didn't have in undergraduate, right, in your undergraduate degree. That now that you're in grad school, you have some new roles and new responsibilities that weren't there. Even things, I think about things like parents helping out with things like bills, car insurance, rent, that sometimes that stops after undergrad for whatever reason that might be. So grad school adds those new responsibilities that you may not have had before. And for a lot of people, coming to grad school also means moving to a new place, right? A new city, a new state, whatever that might be. So the supports that maybe you had established, you're having to start over again. So really wanting to recognize that if you feel like I'm having a harder time finding my balance, you're not alone, right? It's a very common experience to feel uncertain of like, how do I balance all of this? How do I have enough time? I think one of the other things that I see graduate students do is graduate school full time is 9 credit hours. And a lot of times, especially new graduate students will be like, I took 15 in undergrad, like I'm good with 12 or 15. The reason it's 9 credit hours is because the time that you are required to spend outside of class, working on the assignments, doing the readings, integrating that knowledge is more than it is in undergrad. We expect you to spend more hours on that. And so that also can be a surprise of like, well, I spent 2 hours per week on every class in undergrad and it was enough. It's not going to be enough in grad school, right? And so that also adds that added pressure for sure. So with that, and thinking about all these new roles and responsibilities that you all are facing, let's talk a little bit about graduate school and what the research says about relationships outside of the program. So your personal relationships with individuals who are like not peers in grad school. Does anyone know what the research says about graduate school and relationships? I don't want to be the one to say it because then y'all are going to be like, oh, I can't stand her. It's not good. It's not good. They find that in graduate school, the satisfaction in relationships and almost all relationships goes down. That is from the perception more often of the graduate student themselves. Sometimes you find a few studies where they asked partners, but for the most part, it tends to be from the graduate student themselves. The satisfaction goes down. My intuition and things that some other research has supported is that it's not that the relationship suddenly is bad. It's that suddenly your ability, right? Like the impact on your role in that relationship, your role in the relationship is being impacted by the graduate student stress, right? And so maybe you don't have as much time, maybe you don't have as much patience, right? Maybe you're feeling lost and confused and you're trying to explain it to them and the other person just doesn't understand what you're going through. I think it's one of the challenging parts of grad school is that there are so few who go to grad school. And even though they're trying so hard to understand, often family, friends, close relationships just don't understand quite how challenging and difficult it is because it's more than just an academic challenge. right? It's this idea of being challenged personally to become this professional, right? To become a part of this profession. And it's so important and such a passion area that the fear of failure is so much higher in grad school that can all weigh on you. This does not mean that your relationships will be terrible in grad school. This does not mean that you won't have any friends when you're done, or that you won't have a partner anymore, whatever that means. It does mean that in that balancing act, you're going to have to be more intentional, right? And making time, making a place for those family members, those friends, those partners, right? So just being really aware of that, right? And it's okay that you're on one path and they're on the other, because in the end, right, like you can still see each other through those trees and you can still end up at the same place. And it's okay if they join you on the path. It's just sometimes hard to take them along when you're growing in a different way, and it can be challenging. So with that, and talking about graduate school and relationships, let's talk about building a community. And so I'm talking about building a community within the graduate school, within your program, your department, right? This is crucial. And those who are in my class, I say it all the time. It is one of my research areas. It's one of my passions. This idea of the need for building a community in graduate school above and beyond any other academic endeavor you've taken. Because graduate school does have a lot of pressure, your expectations are really high, because not many have had the same experience. Within the grad program, it's crucial that you find and build a community, right? So this could be the peers that are in your classrooms, right? The peers who are in the same program as you are. This is seeking out like the Graduate Student Association and going to like their socials and getting to know other graduate students, right? So finding those people who, when you talk about how hard this is, they can understand where you're coming from. They can understand how hard it is. The other thing is that for most instructors, educators, as we move into grad school, our assignments become more and more ambiguous, meaning that there's a lot less structure, right? Like we often don't say this many words, this many, I mean, sometimes you do, but we want it to be you and unique to you. And so we give a lot of like, whatever you'd like to do. Well, that can be dang frustrating, right? So having a peer that you can go to and be like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And trying to find like, okay, here's what I think they mean. Here's what I think would be helpful is so, so crucial. The other thing is that eventually you're going to be in that profession. And having a network of colleagues is going to set you up for success as you move into that profession. Yalom, which you may not know, and that's okay. Yalom, who's a famous psychotherapist, super, super famous, an amazing writer. Yalom does an amazing job writing. Yalom talked about that in his doctorate program. He built a colleague group and they met once a month. And as they went on to their internships and went on to their first careers, they held a meeting every single month where they checked in with each other. They consulted on cases that were really hard. They got support from one another. And he talked about that even when he was in his late 80s, this group of individuals was still meeting every month, even though most of them had retired. They had lost some in death, right? At this point, they still met every month because it was such a core part of their well-being and their mental health. So that's also the goal of building a community in the grad school, is that as you transition from grad school into your career, having someone to support you through that process, someone you can talk to as you go through that transition is so, so crucial. The other piece of building a community is within your program, looking at like faculty. So here's the thing, even though all of us faculty are so cool and so amazing, you're going to like some of us differently than others. And that a lot of times just comes down to personality, right? That maybe they think and process the same way you do. Maybe their temperament matches your temperament more, or it's more of an exact opposite. So you become the yin and yang of each other, right? That like, you're like, boy, I really, when I'm with them, I feel like I can be authentic and vulnerable. I feel like I can ask questions that I'm afraid are dumb questions. and I know that they'll support me. Finding your faculty or two who is that person for you is crucial in graduate school, because you are going to face moments of uncertainty, of difficulty. So having that person that you can go talk to with less fear than you may have going to, for example, a department chair, unless the department chair is your person, and that's okay too. But finding your faculty, because we are doing this for a reason, and it's because this is where our passion lies. So we want to support you and we want to be there for you. And so with that connection, it gives us a chance to kind of see where you are and see where you need us and see where you need more support. We also have some power, right? We're able to take things to the faculty, so exceptions or questions, and see if we can make some adjustments to get you what you need. So in that building a community, yes, peers and colleagues as much as possible, but also finding a faculty member or two, right, that you connect with, that you trust. In this whole part, in looking at community, this idea that it takes a village, right? This takes a village. That's what I also want you to hear for your interpersonal relationships outside of the program. That the hope is that you're able to get what you need from each area of your community so that it doesn't fall on one person to try to be the end all be all, because no one can do that, right? Everyone will get burnt out and exhausted if they feel like they're the only place where you're receiving support. So utilize all of those areas of support, knowing that like when I'm feeling this way, here's where I get that support. When I'm feeling this way, here's where I can get that support. So really setting yourself up and surrounding yourself with the support system is so important to your mental health and your well-being. I feel like I'm going fast, but it may be slow. I don't know. I talk a lot. Maybe that's why I'm a counselor. I talk a lot. So now looking at this idea of self-care and wellness, I am obsessed with self-care and wellness, and I get really frustrated because I think it's a buzzword that people throw around without actually investing in the self-care and wellness of themselves. As a faculty, I have been known to do that a time or two, where I've told my students, take care of yourself, but let my own self-care slide. So I think it's very, very important. And I think it's something that has become, I'm thinking of the word, but it's in my next point too. So I'm going to come back to that. But talking about self-care and wellness, there's a lot of self-care and wellness like plans out there and things that can assist you. They talk about different domains. The one that is often referenced is the 8 domains of self-care. So really recognizing that you need to take care of yourself emotionally, physically, occupationally, socially, spiritually, intellectually, environmentally, and financially. Whew, that's a lot. You're a complex individual. And so you have complex needs. With that being said, I have found in my own journey in self-care and wellness is that it's not always equal. I don't always need the same level of self-care in all of the domains at the same time. That sometimes need more, some of them need more attention, other ones I'm good with, right? So really not like my very first self-care plan in my graduate program was like, had 2 things for everything. And I was like, every week I'm going to do these 2 things for every domain. And I found 1 that I couldn't keep up with it. And 2, I didn't need it sometimes in certain domains. And so it started to feel like a waste of time. It started to feel like busy work, right? So recognizing that you want to have those in your plan, but also checking in of like, do I need that this week? Or should I spend more time on this other domain that's needing my attention more so than another one? On this point, also being really reflective and thoughtful around, is my wellness plan, is my self-care plan just another task on my to-do list, or is it actually rejuvenating? Right. So I've talked to several students who are like, working out is my thing. Beautiful. In times of stress, they're like, I went this morning, but I've got so much to do. Right? At that moment, working out wasn't rejuvenating. It was another thing that was overwhelming their to-do list. So giving yourself permission to be like, this is the thing I'm going to let go of right now, and I'm going to focus on this aspect because this is what I need. Also thinking of rejuvenating. I am an introvert, and I am a pretty extreme introvert, and I know that's surprising for my students because I'm super talkative, but I'm actually a pretty strong introvert. So I get really tired being around people for long periods of time, right? And so when I wrote my plan, I was like, okay, socially, 2 weekends a month, I'm going to go out with my friends, whatever that may be, right? And so I would make the plans and I would go, but I'd come home so tired because I went in so tired that it wasn't rejuvenating, right? It would have been better off to say, like, hey, this week I just don't have it in me. Can we look at next week? And then I could go, and that time spent with friends could be rejuvenating. I could be present and engaged and enjoy the opportunity versus like, okay, I said I was going to do this, so I'm going to do it, and marking it off my to-do list. So really making sure that the things that you include in your self-care and wellness are actually rejuvenating. And they're not necessarily always rejuvenating all the time, right? That kind of checking for me, like, is this something that's going to build my energy, or is this something that's going to take more energy from me? And kind of reprioritizing based off of that and kind of deciding where might I want to put my energy. I also find that I have to do a lot of mindfulness when I'm doing self-care. When I do start to be like, okay, let's just get it done with, I have to do some mindfulness of like, what do I need in this moment? How can I take this task that I'm doing and actually make it fulfill my energy? So, taking a moment to take those deep breaths when I'm doing self-care and re-engage in self-care, setting boundaries around self-care sometimes, right? Like, I am a big fan of putting my phone on do not disturb when I'm working on my self-care and wellness. But it can seem really daunting when you have so much to do on your to-do list to do that. With that, and looking at self-care and wellness, and this idea of the challenges of grad school, something that often is missing in the conversation on self-care and wellness is this idea of self-compassion. Right? So self-compassion, sometimes it's also called self-grace, that they sometimes are used synonymously. So when thinking about self-compassion, I would love for you to think about a friend, right? For a minute, kind of visualize this friend who's going through a really hard time, right? And the friend is talking to you about like, I have all of this stress happening. I have all of these things on my to-do list. And here's all of the ways that I am failing right now. Here's all the things that I have dropped the ball on, all of the things that I didn't follow through on, right? You're talking to them. What would you say to your friend? Would you say, yeah, you're completely failing. You should just stop trying. Give up. You're obviously a failure, right? You would never say those things to your friend. So why do we say them to ourselves? Why do we tell ourselves you're not good enough? You're not trying hard enough. If you would have planned better, you would have gotten it all done. This is, here it is, I'm too lazy, right? Like all of these things that we tell ourselves when we feel like we're failing, right? Whether others feel that way or not, but when we feel like we're failing, we tend to be really critical of ourselves. We start to analyze, like, okay, but you were on Facebook for 45 minutes. Seriously? You couldn't have gotten some work done in that? Right? Versus to a friend, we might be like, well, yeah, but maybe you just needed a moment to rest. So can we say those same things to ourselves? Can we provide ourselves with the same compassion that we would provide to a good friend? And that's what self-compassion is about, right? This idea of, can you care for yourself even when taking a moment for yourself is filled with guilt? And that's a lot of times where self-care and wellness fails, is that we have this thing that we're like, okay, I'm going to do this for self-care. And then as it's coming up close to the time to do it, we're feeling guilty because we know we have so much to do. And then either we don't enjoy the activity because we're so riddled with like, I have all of this other stuff weighing on me, or we enjoy it for a moment. But then as soon as we're done, we're like, oh my gosh, now I'm even further behind. Right. And then I shouldn't have gone to the movie with my friends. I should have told them that I could just meet them for a cocktail after. I shouldn't have stayed so long. Right. So when those shoulds come in and that guilt and that remorse for taking care of yourself comes in, that's when it's crucial that self-compassion becomes a part of your self-care and wellness plan. Right. We have to forgive ourselves for being human. We have to accept our whole selves. Right? We have to be willing to speak to ourselves in a way that a friend would speak to us, and or seeking out a friend who will speak to us that way and believing them that it's okay if something fell between the cracks. It's okay if not everything was completed in the time that you wanted to complete it. Okay. I know for me, and hopefully for all faculty, yes, I tell students, I used to tell students to tell everybody I was mean because nobody says I'm mean. And finally the students were like, that's not true. So now I talk about the fact that I have really high expectations, and I do. I have high expectations of my students. I hold the bar high. And if you're communicating with me, I'm going to meet you wherever you are, right? We're going to figure out what the bar looks like for you. If that means needing a little more time, if that means sitting and talking to me about what it means, like whatever that is, communication is key. But to seek communication, right, to share with me that you're struggling, often I encourage you to do some self-compassion first, because you have to give yourself grace and compassion and having to ask for help, because we tend to be really awful at asking for help. So, that's what you would tell a friend. Can you let them know that you need some extra time? Can you let them know you need extra support? So tell yourself it's okay as well to do that. So with self-compassion, I wanted to give you all the name of the most famous researcher right now in the field of self-compassion. It's Kristin Neff. And there's many things I really adore and appreciate about Kristin Neff. And one of them is that she makes available for free a lot of her materials. She updates the website on a regular basis, but she has an entire web page of self-compassion exercises and meditations that you can use without paying anything, right? Because grad students don't have any money, right? So use her resources for free. And I'd love to kind of walk you through what her self-compassion meditations sound like, and what is the messages that you can say to yourself in those moments that you're feeling guilty, that you're feeling like you're not enough. These are the guided practices that she has up and available at any time. She also down here has a list of exercises, right? Like, how would you treat a friend, which is what I was just talking about. The self-compassion break, exploring self-compassion through writing, supportive touch, changing your critical self-talk, self-compassion journal. So she really wants you to be able to apply that to yourself. And the fact that she makes it freely available, it just speaks to how she values self-compassion and how she recognizes how much it's needed. So I'm going to play one of them now. Time-wise, I'm just going to play one of the shorter ones. We'll do a general self-compassion break one. They have ones that are specific to different categories and different things that you might be going through. But we'll do the general self-compassion break. All right, so that's an example of a self-compassion break, and noticing that it was 5 minutes, right? That our self-care doesn't always have to mean that we spent an hour doing something. Sometimes it's that we spent 5 minutes rejuvenating, checking in, providing self-compassion for ourselves. You all are so, so busy. And if you set the goal of 20 minutes on this thing, an hour on this thing, sometimes you don't have time to make that. So also make sure that you have those things that take 5 minutes, right? That are able to rejuvenate you in a short amount of time because your schedules are so, so busy. I just, as it was going, I realized that I am so disheartened that I didn't include the name of Brene Brown. If you don't know Brene Brown, seek her out, and I can spell her name. Let's see. She is a researcher. She's a social worker who has started researching vulnerability, is where she started at. The first book that really took off and that became really popular, Atlas of the Heart, was The Gifts of Imperfection, which I think relates so much to this idea of letting go of perfectionism, to give ourselves self-compassion and grace, to be okay with us not being perfect all the time and sharing that with others. Atlas of the Heart is another amazing book by Brene Brown. She has an amazing TED Talk that you can find on TED Talk. She has on Netflix. I don't know if it's still on, it was on Netflix, but she had a talk that she did on Netflix. So encouraging you to find those places where there's acceptance of imperfection, acceptance of struggles and difficulties in that process. I realize I talk a lot and we only have 3 minutes, but does anyone have any last minute questions or thoughts or things you'd love to add for the whole group? Oh, Tara Brock. I actually don't know Tara Brock. Look at all the wonderful resources y'all are providing for each other. This is amazing. So looking up Tara Brock as well, and then Chaudhrin's The Places That Scare You would be another great one. Appreciate you spending time here. This was a dedication to your self-care and wellness. So already pat yourself on the back that you just spent an hour this week taking care of yourself. And what an amazing gift that you gave yourself. So really celebrating every small step along the way. All right.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nicholson. We greatly appreciated you having you here. I think it will be very valuable for our graduate students. So with that, I'm sure if there are additional questions, Dr. Nicholson is on campus. We can get you in touch. And we do have more sessions in November. So November 8th, we have the graduate student panel. We will not record that one, so please attend. And the day after, November 9th, we will have copyright for graduate students. So look for those announcements coming out. So I think that's it. If there are any last questions, we can take them. We're right at time. So I think we will wish everyone a good night otherwise. And thank you very much for joining us.